bring up, I want to recognize the two other colleagues. Tom McDonald was with our English department for a number of years, and Phil Sorrentino, not too far removed, retired, and we occasionally get him back in the building to substitute. But those two gentlemen also, I'm sure, have tons of stories to share. This is a part of what was presented at the 20-year kind of reunion. But I want you to look at some of the symbolism. This was the original seal for the school. It was founded in 1991, and certainly as we moved over to Maggie Walker, trying to embrace the two different histories, we've changed the colors around initially on it, and this was always considered the academic seal, and then later on we'll get to something else. This young man never made it through our full program. Jason Tice. This kid had his wardrobe computerized. He knew what was in the laundry, what was on the rack, and when we had an opportunity to send a faculty member to get multimedia training, we sent him. He trained us. He was that good, and then he moved away. Those are some of the kinds of students that we had in those early years, and so you'll see a few of these, Travis Hall, with Wilder. So there was a lot of opportunities, but they truly were, as John said, the risk takers, coming in. And I too remember that ride on the bus with Steve Ballou, because part of my role was to protect the directors of this school. So I knew a little bit heads up with it, but the thought was there is that if we can't offer students more than what they can get at home, why do they come to us? And so even in those early years of Reaganomics supply side, we always had to be under that mindset, because nobody has to come. They all have their homeschool divisions, and if they cease to come, we cease to exist. So that was pretty much what we looked at in those early years. And I'm not going to talk about every photograph. I just want to go through a couple of these relatively quick to kind of get you an idea of the flavor of what it was like with our planning committee in those early stages where we were in TJ. Because as John shared, that initial concept is that as we brought a class in, TJ was going to phase the class out. So when we brought that group of 70 in that first year, there was not a freshman class at TJ. The second year, when we brought that 180 group in, then there wasn't going to be a sophomore class. So as we would bring one on, they would leave one off. That was the intent. The other thing about the political dynamics of that group of 70, that first year's group, they were seniors for 4 years. But that second year, when 180 freshmen came in, and suddenly they were getting outvoted in clubs and offices, they learned what coalitions. And it was a shakeup. In fact, that's when we started actually having primaries in some of those things, because they were getting wiped out to polls. This is this was our first director, Steve Ballou. I've got one story I want to share about Steve. Years back, when I was in the teaching mode, the 9th graders were the ones that did Virginia Junior Academy Science Paper. And we would have pretty much 20 to 30 every year. They would get accepted to present their papers. And later on, we moved it to sophomores and so on. But one year, VMI was the host of the Virginia Junior Academy of Science. And this was the year that VMI, all the controversy about going co-ed. Steve was a graduate of VMI. He had all his VMI stuff on his desk. So while we were at the conference, I found a bumper sticker that says, if a female wants the VMI experience, you should marry a VMI male. Unbeknownst to Steve, I put that sticker on the front of his desk. And our girls, seeing that, just tore him apart. They didn't know where it was coming from, but that sticker was there, and the Betty Shannon folks and that group, what do you know? So that's why I'm so well suited to my job currently. That was the first year's faculty, and not a whole lot has changed. You saw the one in the second year. So in that room that was taken is what that was our office, our copy room, and our lounge. And the furniture days we had this vision of having a student lounge for students, and that lasted 1 year. The furniture, the Trevettis at that time had a motel type thing down in Chester, and we took another one of those trucks, and we got all the televisions that they were getting out of the motel, we got all of their tables, their chairs, and that became the student lounge for 1 year. Some of you remember that room 303, because later it ended up being social stage. That was also the area where the breakers were for the 3rd floor. So the other issues that we had with the older building with TJ is that in the computer lab, you could either have 2 banks of computers on, or 1 bank of computers and 1 overhead projector. You couldn't have 2 banks and an overhead projector, or you'd have to go down to 303 and flip the circuit breakers to get them kicked back on. Outside of plant services at Richmond, there were several of us that rewired parts of that building, stringing the computer cord out the windows, down around. At one time, we were all using AppleWorks, and I could hit the print key. I could step out of one office, walk all the way across the gym floor, and get to the other office just as my print was coming off. That was the sort of environment we had. Those of you remember where the physics room was located up on the 3rd floor. There was a whole chunk of the ceiling that came down one day, just concrete flooring right there above the floor. So we had all those kinds of just little minor maintenance issues that if you didn't take care of it yourself, it just didn't get taken care of. So many of us were doing things that would not normally be in anybody's job description. John mentioned we had 2 bell schedules. Well, this is where we inherited the no bells. TJ was on a bell system. They made announcements. If we ever had to make an announcement, I had to go into their office and individually flip switches on the board for our rooms. And woe unto me if I flipped the wrong switch and that announcement went into a TJ classroom. But flip it. And then I had to flip them all back. We would get their announcements, but they would not get ours. Eventually, I figured out we really don't need announcements. And in our classrooms, on a ladder, I cut every speaker wire of our classroom. When we left TJ, I reconnected those wires so that they would work. But we would not have gotten any of the code reds, code blues, code yellows, but we didn't get their announcements either. I'm going to go through these. Let's look at some of those early pictures. So hopefully some of you recognize Miss Hoggins over there. For Mr. Walter, 2 years ago on his birthday, I gave him a picture of the Jane Goodall book. There's a Mr. Graybeard in there, and I put that in. This is Tharp the Younger. Some of you don't know that, but we did have another Tharp. He was an English teacher, and Tom can remember back when we actually tried to do writing across the curriculum. That was one of the things. That wasn't fully embraced.
It's a novel idea.
That's a novel idea. But it wasn't fully embraced by everybody. And likewise, I tried to embrace with my AP biology the Socratic seminar, of which I was told, just tell me what I need to know. I want to pass the MCAT, just tell me what I need to know. I don't like this idea of me having to bring something to the table. So we had a number of those, and those were the years of Strand before we went to mentorship, Ron Begat, a few others in there. So we can see some of those early faculty members. The one that John and I were talking about were whether it was our Air Force or Navy. I do remember programming his computer so that when he turned it on, it was a pilot and it had the radar lock on the sound. So if you ever heard that, I thought it was hilarious. Being an Army guy, he didn't think it was so exciting knowing that someone had locked onto him. So we had a very, I would say, faculty members that really, you had to have a love one another in the sense that we were talking to each other pretty great. We were using every single classroom, every period of the day when we were teaching. And the other challenges that we had was growth. We were kind of limited to about 560 students. By the time we phased in, we couldn't grow any more than that because TJ was at that point. So they couldn't grow, we couldn't grow. They've even converted one of the cafeterias downstairs, it used to be the faculty cafeteria, into 6 additional classrooms, the CC rooms, as they affectionately call it. And we put all the English teachers in there. You know, that was where they were relegated to down there. And it was kind of interesting because it was next to one of the furnace rooms, and one of the TJ maintenance guys was storing gasoline in the building. This is a no-no. We happened to also put it in one of the air return vents, which sent the gasoline fumes into all the CC rooms. And it took us a little while to figure that part out. The other thing is for evacuation drills, we were relegated to the auditorium. Normally when you have a tornado drill, you try to get down to the lowest part of the building. They put us at the highest point of the building, which was in the balcony of the auditorium. We'd be the first sucked out the top. But this is part of that original, you know, kind of cast of group. So you can kind of see what some of those rooms look like. The biology classroom I had no running water in it. Went across the hall to the fountain to get water to bring back into the classroom to do experiments. Then later, as we were able to get more parts of the building to us, we actually were able to get a few of the labs. Now, the chemistry labs that you see here, the fume hood that I designed for the chemistry lab vented directly out a window. It probably doesn't meet OSHA standards and PA standards, but it worked. And the chemistry lab that was in was probably about from where Leo is, maybe over to here with the desk, and it was a tight fit. John mentioned that we try to coordinate the use of the building. So Barbara Almstead, who later had a child that went here, she and I worked together on trying to coordinate when we could use the auditorium, when the drama was going to be in there, when our jazz band could be in there, all those different kinds of features. We had football, TJ. One of the strong benefits, I think, of that experience was the fact that for the athletic program, our students were able to share. And under that system, it was TJ, Governor School kids, and community high school kids that could share in the sports programs. So we had 6 football players, as I remember, was the most in any one given year that we had on the team. So when kids here ask about, we'd like to have a football team, you know, when we had 560 students, we only had 6 students. We only added, we're at 726. If you do the math, we don't have enough students to field a football team. And I don't want to stereotype linemen by any means, because this young man right here went to Georgia Tech in the engineering program, but we don't have a whole lot of linemen either. We actually protect any but we were able to bring on soccer, and we brought on volleyball, and so we added a lot of sports that TJ had. And that was an issue in itself with coaches and assistant coaches, and what Paige Hawkins was trying to fight for our part of the athletic program, and Steve Ballou was the baseball coach. You know, our director was the baseball coach. We had 2 budget line items, school and baseball. That was it.
They had great uniforms.
Great uniforms. So you can see some of the early things, and we were able to kind of steal Coach Holder and Deborah Snag away from TJ when he retired to come over here with the track program, because that was another feature of it that a lot of our students, probably for the first time, were actually being able to be involved with athletic events and sports where they wouldn't have been able to do that in their home high schools, particularly. Some would, but for most, here it was like try it, see what happens. Our first soccer team had 3 girls on it because we didn't have enough girls to have a girls team. 2 of the girls were actually pretty good soccer players. The third one was on air because they were boys. So here you can see some of these early stages of what we had. Community service, that was one of the things. We actually dropped the number of required hours of community service from what it originally was down to 140 because the whole idea that it's 140 contact hours for a fire and unit was more than that. The Asian assemblies and some of the the dancers and the cultural pieces of it. Those are the things that really kind of made the school particularly. Ms. Rhinos here is a physician. This was the first time our band really performed in front of a huge audience, and it's when we had graduation at the old Carpenter Center. And then this is kind of transitioning some from the old to the new. This young man right here who's not that young anymore, Matt Carter, is a visiting scholar at UVA right at the moment. Keep trying to get him back into this area. He's been a professor up in Canada for several years. And so there's a number of those. Josh Kaplowitz, mom used to be head of the CDC in this area. So in those early years, we had a lot. This young lady, and it goes back to me trying to protect the school and protect our directors from the past. She only got in trouble one time her entire 4 years, and it was for writing graffiti. Graffiti on TJ walls. And the director said, "How do you know it was our student?" "It's in Latin." One of the reasons I've been trying to get Steve Ross deported back to Canada is he ruined her physics career in getting a 4 out of Caltech. She had about 32, 33 hours of math from VCU. As a 9th grader, she wanted to be a physicist. But yeah, Lauren, that was her only blemish, the only office referral she ever got. And I was like, "How do you know it was our student?" "It's in Latin." Trust me, it's hard. So a lot of fond memories there at TJ, and then also our VCU connection. I'll go through these things. Dr. Burton, we used to have visiting coming over to the school and doing presentations. So the connection with VCU early on in that partnership, truly that's been a real blessing to the school and to the students. So some of the original dual enrollment courses, the VCU professor would come over, they would co-teach the course with our teachers until they felt comfortable, with that relationship. Art history, going back to see Mr. Slipping there in the center. Another one of the VCU visiting professors. But if you get a feeling, you can kind of see that eclectic group of chairs, desks, and other things. And registration, big deal getting those VCU ID cards. And then this is, you recognize more of the trappings now of the other area. So a few of the folks that were involved with those early years of getting this thing up and going. And then certainly the Government School Foundation, a huge boost from where we were at TJ in the early days to where we are now, with it. So, there's still that family atmosphere, whether we're at TJ or whether we're here. And it is to that diversity of where the students come from. Because on this campus, or on the TJ campus, you were meeting kids from completely out of your realm. Most other students wouldn't have had that opportunity until they went to college. I love some of the covers that we've had over, but I think one of my favorite is for that first year. This one, Survival of the Fittest. I have something to do indirectly with the title because Tharp's law was adapt, migrate, or perish. I still have that same sensitivity. Dorothea Shannon, one of our directors, and she was the first one that actually got Mrs. Taylor and myself out of the classroom and in more of the administrative role. We had been doing that anyway for several years, going downtown and liaisoning back and forth with Richmond, with personnel, with finance, and figuring that. And someone down there told us, you're doing what principals are supposed to be doing. You should be an administrator. I said, I'm just doing what my director's telling me to do. One of those type of things. Dorothea's the one that got us really back on financial level playing field, working with budgets and pulling us in. And that's where my big transition went, from out of the classroom into dealing with all the other stuff that I do now. But I still occasionally get back in the classroom as a sub. The Viking piece there with the ducking booth, and if you'll notice Mr. Waller's duck there, well, there's been a long history with Mr. Waller and his duck. That's probably Gregor, one of those earlier ducks. And that duck occasionally went on field trips because it led way too much of a sheltered life in the English department. So it's gone whitewater rafting, it's gone caving, it's gone halfway around the country. It's had rockets attached to its wings, electrodes to its wings. It was in an oven one time with E. coli. So, yeah, the ducks had more experiences than most. But this is those field day things that John was talking about, you know, the tug of wars, pie throwing, the chess matches. You know, Jimmy Hare, one of our graduates, fantastic chess master, would play 8 or 9 people at the same time, beat them all. And I can remember one of the very few times Mr. Houghton ever wrote an office referral was on Jimmy Hare for a public display of affection. And I went, yes! Finally, something's got him distracted from chess. Sulzer, you know, whose dad was later our swim coach here. International travel, a number of the different opportunities. I've had a couple opportunities to go with the Model UN, you know, when they've gone to Philadelphia. I went once to Duke, which was good for their security conference. They were dealing with Russia. I can remember, you know, one of our students was playing the role of Khrushchev. And I said, take your shoe off and pound it on the table. He said, what? I said, just do it. All the adults knew what was going on. What is he doing? And they loved it. So, yeah, Duke Security Council. So we've had those in Philadelphia, trying to protect Miss Taylor over here in Philadelphia. We went down for the real Philly steak and cheese. And it just happened to be in a relatively seedy area of Philadelphia because we went past these shops with whips and leather and straps. So moved the kids to the other side of the street. Our first mentorships. The Cherry Falls is still playing, by the way. You can still see that on cable. So if any of you want to actually see all the insights of that. And this young lady, Molly Marr, actually got to work on Cherry Falls at that time. So we did get 1+ out of it.
Not as an actress.
Not as an actress, it's sort of behind the stagehand type thing. And then the transition time. And that's what we were looking at, is that we knew if we were going to grow, we had to find a different place. So we had a site selection committee that started looking at all over different areas of Richmond. The Azalea Mall, 300,000 square feet, we looked at that. I calculated it was going to cost us $600,000 a year in utility bills, but we could have had an indoor track. We looked at the Figgy building, you know, which later Pittston Coal Company. That was a site that had, instead of brick and stuff like that, it had drywall in it. We're thinking, yeah, our kids aren't too destructive. You know, there's not going to be holes in the drywall. It had a tunnel system. And I said, that can't be good. A curved tunnel, I'd have to have a camera every 15 feet, you know, connecting the buildings. And plus, you know, we're trying to get away from that elitist idea. And here's this huge emblem, you know, on the Figgy building. We looked at the where Benedictine High School was currently. We looked at the Abbey. That was before 288 because they were looking to sell that. We actually looked at Benedictine High School. No parking. So there were a number of options. The insurance building across from the United Methodist Center, the tobacco companies, all over. And we thank probably Tim Kaine, you know, at that time was mayor, that said, why don't you take a look at Maggie? So I went in this building, had to go down to the city to get the key because it was blocked up, and went in here with one police officer and flashlights. And we started looking through the building. There were other people living in the building. The police officer said he wasn't coming back in the building again. And so we looked at it. We had BCWH, the architects, looked at it. It was structurally sound, and that was, you know, the part of kind of moving here. And then certainly the renovation foundation. You'll recognize some of these names, you know, that's up there. You know, put it together, and you know, later, you know, we celebrated it when this is the limited liability partnership. So in order to get the historic tax credits to $6 million, there had to be some kind of a partnership because schools are tax exempt, can't get tax credits. So these were the ones that signed on the dotted line. Essentially, we leased the building from them for $1 a year. And then the revitalization part of Maggie Walker, this kind of gives you a little bit of the time frame of where it went. And some of you that have not seen some of the earlier sites, this is what it looked like, from the aerial view. Where you'll notice where our lower student parking lot is. That was a baseball field, softball field, and then we've got the Maggie Walker piece that you can see in here. And then the other part is, if you look at how this residential piece, you'll see how this has all changed since the building was renovated. So you're looking at square footage of about 150,000. There was 138 existing, and then when they did the additional pieces of it, but the original cost that they were looking at for this, most high schools, they're looking at 20 to 40 acres to put a new high school. And we're working with 12.5, kind of landlocked with that. That's what the building looked like, pieced together. If you went up into the third floor, chemistry rooms, when you went in there, there were pigeons in there. You go into one of the bathroom stalls, pigeons would fly out. There were about 100 or so spirit duplicator cans of fluid downstairs. Now, why those didn't get touched off, I'll never know. And then after the renovation, BCWH actually won an architectural award for the renovation of this building. And part of this, Charles Piper and I presented in Washington, D.C. at the architectural convention. But the outside, now if you go out in our courtyard now, you'll notice that it's grown quite a bit in the last 13 years with the dogwood tree and the other stuff that's in there. The gym before and after, when they stripped all of the paint off and saw the red brick, originally they were going to paint that over. We said, no, leave it. There are very few gyms anywhere that are like ours. And then when they did the expansion piece, you can see that was the new part of the construction. But there was $600,000 went in this building just for the asbestos abatement, to get all the asbestos and lead out of here. The auditorium, you could see right up through the roof. There have been fires set down in front of where the stage is located, for the homeless that were in here keeping warm.
Took two full dump trucks to remove all the bottles and cans out of the auditorium.
The library, as they had it, and that was one of the reasons, when the last year that anybody was in the building, Community and Open actually shared this upper floor. And that was the 91, and it was closed after that. Well, they didn't remove a lot of the books or anything like that. It was left in here, and then when it was vandalized, all the copper was ripped out of, pipes were cut with water still being on, flooded the downstairs. There was asbestos tiles in the floor, so nothing could be saved. So they couldn't save any of those books because it was all contaminated. So you can kind of see a little bit of what the courtyard, graffiti through all the building. One of the only areas that was not graffiti is this out here. This mural that was put up was not touched. No one damaged that, so they respected that part of that history. So you can see what the cafeteria looked like before, after. And then after the renovation, you can see what the parking lot. And here's what Lombardi Street looked like in 2002, where the Kroger's lot currently is and where you have the housing right across the street, that diagonal. You had this, it was a cart factory. And then on Lombardi and Lee Street, where you see all these vacant lots, now you see houses. So I worked on 2 Habitat houses on Moore Street before this building was ever renovated. And none of the commercial speculation was going on Lee Street. There were a few Habitat homes, but nobody was buying in the area. And that was one of the promises that Tim Kaine had made, and at the time, Chief Oliver, is that if this project is taken over, this is going to be an educational zone between Virginia Union, VCU, and then Maggie Walker. They were going to clean this area up. And I think they did a pretty good job of fulfilling that promise. And then here's the corner, Moore Street with the church. New construction since 2002. All these houses were built. Those were vacant lots. That was actually a drug zone right there. So New shops opened in 2004, Lombardi Street, the VCU parking deck, Broad Street. So all that has had an impact, and VCU was headed this direction anyway. But what this particular project did made way for a lot more of this kind of improvements within the community. A lot of people don't remember that the street that's out here that goes up to Kroger's, it went down and under. There was a tunnel underneath there. And when we had the faculty over here, when we were doing some of our original visiting and looking, and everybody was wearing hard hats, you go underneath there, and you know, there was a little ammonia smell as you went underneath there. So the regional impact, regional cooperation, you know, certainly about students, and these are the things I think that we've been able to share, is that truly that public-private partnership. This has been a model for other schools and school divisions to look at for renovation. And then you have that huge project schedule. That's a picture of Google. You know, I took Google Earth of what this area looks like now compared to what it looked like prior to the renovation. So you can see where we're pretty well located here. I also took a picture down farther below where the Redskins training camp is. I'm waiting for the next Google picture to show what it is now so I can have the before and the after piece of it. But a lot of that area has been developed since we went into that particular renovation piece. So yeah, for me, it's been, I can't think of a better place to work. So at this time, if we can open it up, if you've got specific questions, yeah, I mean, a lot of those senior pranks, again, most of the things have not been destructive. They've been relatively creative. There's been a few that are the same, flags being run up a flagpole that had certain symbolism on them and wording. And again, it would be, how do you know it's our students? I said, trust me, it's our students. TJ would not have written it in that same format. So, questions? Yes, sir.
This is for Mr. Wilkes. The car that you graded the papers in, is that the Wilkesmobile? Is that the same car?
No,
We didn't have off-campus lunch at that time either over at TJ because there were a lot of things that we, and I guess here's another thing that I remember. How many of you remember name tags? Anywhere? And part of the challenge that we had with two schools is we had to enforce certain rules that we didn't necessarily want to enforce, but we had to enforce them because that was the TJ rule. So anytime someone saw me in the hallway, it was usually a giveaway if they didn't have their name tag on because the books would kind of go like this. And they knew that wasn't going to work. So then it would just be turn around and start walking. That usually worked because you could go in a full circle and down that inside stair and kind of hide for a while.
I remember a story along those lines of at some point TJ had initiated a frisking policy amongst their students because they were having some problems with certain bad elements in that building. And they made the mistake, they only made it one time because of parents in this building, of knocking on a door, you'll remember this, and pulling out a bunch of Maggie Walker students and frisking them in the hallway. Well, when that got home to parents, you can rest assured that they went ballistic. And knowing some of them were probably attorneys, TJ made an apology, as I recall, to our students for taking them out of class and frisking them. But it was, again, they were applying a rule that they had to use for their own population that didn't go over quite so well with some of our parents.
We had a few compasses that were confiscated because they had sharp points on them, things like that. Yeah, that was a risk factor. Yes?
When was the foundation established?
Which
The Maggie Walker, the Governor's School
well,
Foundation?
actually, when we were at TJ, because in the first 2 to 3 years we had a foundation there, but it had not raised anywhere near the kinds of funds, you know, that what our current foundation is. So yeah, it's been around. And you know, we had local police officers who would occasionally return a student to our presence. You know, if they were off campus smoking.
I knew you were gonna bring up my story. Mr. Tharp asked me at the 10-year reunion if I'd quit, and I did.
I still remember that little camel
I know.
thing floating
I
down
know, that's one of my favorite stories.
there. You know, sometimes you just don't forget. But yeah, Leah.
At what point did the certainty set in for you all? That you felt comfortable, you felt like this was going to be a thing that was going to last?
The program,
Sure.
For me, probably after that first graduating year.
I'd say for me, not until we got in this building. I never went home in June assured that I would have a job in August.
I will say for me that after that first year at the governor's school, because, you know, we're, again, you know, Mrs. Taylor, myself, Mrs. McKay, and Linda Noel Patisse, you know, basically coming on August. Most schools have 18 months as a startup. If you're starting a new program, if any of Chesterfield, whether it's Cosby High School or Cloverdale High School, any of those, about an 18-month startup. You know, we were hired pretty much in August and started in September, and didn't have any books yet. We were still ordering books, figuring out, you know, stuff like that to do, writing the curriculum as we went for several years, hiring, you know, staff and doing that. So it was exciting, but I would say there's very few opportunities where any faculty member has been able to be in that kind of role where you start something from scratch. The closest is the startup, what you guys are doing with your co-op. I mean, you're starting it from scratch and you're building it, and you're pretty much in that same boat. You got to, you know, risk takers. You got to see it and see it through. So yeah, it's not everybody has the temperament for it. Yeah, there's a lot of trust that's involved with it. But for me, it was after that first graduating class.
Two questions. What is one thing that's virtually unchanged, and what do these students need to know today about the history of school?
Well, I still think students are risk takers, you know, when they get involved with these kind of programs, because they're leaving the comforts of their home. You know, from what they've known as middle school students, they put a lot of trust that when they come here, you know, they're going to be taken care of. I think that piece is there. But the road's been paved certainly a lot better, you know, with the reputation of the school and where it's going to go, and that part of the profile that our students have when they go off to colleges, because they are successful. You know, they get there, you know, they're well prepared, and if their biggest challenge is trying to figure out how to deal with the roommate, that's a good thing.
I would say the number one thing that the current generation needs to know is to be appreciative. And the other thing that I would really emphasize, and I say this because some of these folks are sitting here, we are now at a stage, and I'd say we're really just entered this stage where the alumni of this program are worthy of getting to know and reach out to. They are an incredible group of people. Some of them are sitting here. I'm not just saying this because they're here, but they're, as you can imagine, done phenomenal things, and they're just incredible folks. And they have an opportunity, actually, I think it'll happen in April.
April 4th.
Where we have had this before, where alumni come back and they do presentations on their careers and give advice and tips. And, you know, it's kind of hard to tell 16, 17-year-olds to listen to your elders, particularly if they're your parents. But I got to tell you, they'd be wise to listen to some of these alumni who will not only talk about their professional experiences and how they've achieved what they've achieved, but I'm sure some of them, if they were prompted, will tell you some of their favorite memories about being students in this building. Because I can't emphasize enough, if that group of the first 5 or 6 classes had not taken the risk to come to this building or come to this program, none of what we're doing today would have ever existed. You know, they walked into the great unknown.
Some of them, some that are here kind of bridge both ends of it, or the close part of it. Particularly, you know, the last year we were at TJ when we were having all the meetings and the students were involved. What do you envision? You know, what would you like to see over here? Because the architects were asking, the students and the faculty what you'd like to see. Well, you know, one of those things was that senior commons idea. So they have it. They have it on both sides, and that's something that's kind of unique. And the other part that I think is the same is the trust. You know, even when we were at TJ, you know, we trusted the students. You know, occasionally the toilet paper hall pass, you know, would identify one of our students as opposed to a TJ. But you know, there's always been that level of trust. You know, that, you know, you sign in, you sign out. You know, we're not going to worry about the bells. You're going to get there on time. You're going to come. That piece, I think, is there and was there from the start. One of the things that's different that the ones that TJ never had is we didn't do a lock-in over there. You couldn't lock in over there. I mean, doors were open all the time.
And there were slashers.
And certainly there were slashers in the building, or lawyers that were hanging clothes up in the rafters of the auditorium. You know, I mean, there was a lot of unique things there too. Yes.
What was your job immediately preceding working at the governor's school, and how did you become part of the faculty there?
I was at Clover Hill for 4 years in the science department there, teaching biology and earth science. My wife and I relocated down here in the late 80s. You know, I had been teaching in Parkersburg, West Virginia, one of the largest high schools in the state. There were like 8 biology teachers on staff. You know, we had 1,900 students, and that was 10 through 12. You know, so we moved down in this area. Chesterfield at that time was one of the growing areas, so we'd kind of given up the tenure track of where we were. You know, moved in this area, got involved with Chesterfield County, coordinating their gold mine games of all things. You know, years and years ago, and then got hired at Clover Hill High School. So when they started doing the interviewing and stuff for those positions, you know, I'd have to lay it on Pat Taylor. She had heard some of the things that I had done when I was at Clover Hill, because I was always involved with caving and camping and field trips and getting kids into the, you know, off concrete, you know, for the biology, and having live stuff in the classroom, snakes, lizards, whatever, plants, creepy crawlies. And she asked me about it, and so I was one of those few risk takers that said, yes, I'd love to try that, do that.
I was in public relations, advertising, and marketing. I worked in an advertising agency as an account executive for a number of years in Washington, D.C. And then I moved to Richmond and briefly worked at an agency, and then moved into bank marketing, back when Richmond had banks, if you remember those days. Banks that were headquartered here. And then I had an epiphany and decided to follow my quest to be a teacher, and got tired of selling other people's widgets, and went to graduate school. And actually I was in graduate school when a man named Steve Ballou visited one of our classes and told us about this new experiment that he was creating called the Governor School. And I remember saying, that is the stupidest idea I've ever heard in my life. And about 5 months later, I was working for him.
Yeah, Steve was good at delegating, because that August, you know, when we were getting ready, you know, just before school starting, he went to Hilton Head on vacation, and Pat Taylor and I had to figure out the schedule. Yeah, we had a day's notice on that one. Well, thank you guys.
The alumni state? Too late.
Sorry.